نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيد المرسلين يا خاتم النبيين يا شفيع المذنبين يا أنيس الغريبين يا رحمة للعالمين صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم. This past Friday, for those that were there, I mentioned didn't know what to talk about until I heard this clip, or actually it was a class that this woman sent to my wife. This alima course that she's taking. So she sent like 4 clips, each one an hour and a half long. So my wife was listening to one of them, and then she said, listen to this. And of course, the topic of that person's talk was the mercy of Allah. And that's why this Friday I mentioned, that was the title of my talk as well, was the mercy of Allah. And the problem, of course, is she never mentions who the mercy of Allah is. She never mentions Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how, as we talked about Friday, he is that catalyst that will exhibit that mercy of Allah. Until he requests from Allah to begin, the judgment will not begin, and everybody will be miserable. So, and the reason that's significant, and today, I kind of titled today's thing as Fitnah and dajjal. And as I said Friday, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told us that most of the people in the army of Dajjal will be women. Because they won't be fighting physically. It's fighting for the minds. It's a battle for the aqidah, for the beliefs. And this is why today we see this, where there's this great emphasis on creating alimas. The thing though is, ilm or knowledge in Islam is what brings you closer to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if you're learning something that is taking you away from the Messenger, then that is not ilm. It might be knowledge in the English sense, it might be knowledge in the collective sense, but it is not true knowledge. It is not beneficial knowledge. Beneficial knowledge is that which again brings you closer to Allah and His Messenger. If you are learning beneficial knowledge, the more you learn, the more awe you should have of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The more respect, the more honor that you should have for him. And so when people are teaching you, follow the sunnah, but then at the same time teaching you or telling you that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam allegedly didn't know this or couldn't do this or that, then again, that's not true knowledge. If you look, if we look at the story of Shaitan, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expels him for his arrogance, and what was his arrogance? It's kind of, today's arrogance is, I'm protecting Tawheed. And how are you protecting Tawheed? You shouldn't do shirk because you shouldn't praise Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam too much. That's shirk. That's their definition of shirk these days. So, if you look at what Shaitan did, it wasn't really anything different. Shaitan is commanded to prostrate to Adam, alayhi salam. And he's prostrated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala his whole life. And yet when this command comes, he says, I can't do this. He didn't have any problems making sajda to Allah. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands him to make sajda to Adam alayhi salam, and the reality he commands him to make sajda to that nur that he has placed within Adam alayhi salam, which is the nur of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. now he has an issue. And the other issue, or the other aspect of that issue is that, I've done all of this, and this is one of those things that, is interesting. We see a lot of people these days who, they go certain places and they learn certain knowledge. And now everything their parents did was wrong. Oh, see, they used to make Fatiha, they used to make Khatam, they used to do this and that. That is all haram, and now we know. They didn't know, but now we know. We've suddenly become educated. And it's like, oh, see what I'm doing? I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And this is exactly the attitude of shaitan. Is because Adam al-Islam, he just took his first breath, and now the command is prostrate to him. And shaitan has done all of this stuff, and Adam al-Islam hasn't done anything. And it's like, why him? Look at all I've done. All the good works I've done. And there are many aspects that we want to cover today, inshallah, of this. And the thing is that when we start talking like this, a lot of people get very upset. Because when you start talking like this, you have to talk against certain people. Oh, why do you have to talk against people? We're all Muslims. Why do you have to talk against people? One of the interesting things there is that when those people talk against us, then, see, they're talking about the Quran and Sunnah. The interesting thing is, if you look at the Quran, like even when we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, two ways of establishing the uniqueness of Allah. One is to praise Him, which is hamd, and the other is to remove any shortcomings that people attribute to Him, which is subhan. If you look at the Quran, there is more emphasis on negating what people say negative about Him over the emphasis of praising Him. Even though they're both, very, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is praised, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, right? But at the same time, you also have Subhanalladhi asra bi abdihi. So you have those, look at what these people say. So you have that negation, and you have that affirmation. There's more emphasis put on negating what the enemies of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam say over saying what is true. When you read the Quran, it's there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala negates so many different ideologies in the Quran. He negates all of the incorrect ideologies in the Quran. And He mentions, and sometimes He mentions certain people by name. And others He mentions in such a manner that okay, this is exactly who it is, even though He doesn't take the name. And then other He mentions as groups. People who have this, tendency or this ideology or this characteristic, He mentions them. So this notion that, you can't say anything against anybody is alien to Islam, is alien to the Quran. If you look at the hadith of Rasulullah, if you look at the knots that Hassan bin Thabit wrote, or recited rather, if you look at them, people talk about, we only talk about the ones where there's only praise of Rasulullah. The majority of them have negation and attacking those who attack Rasulullah. To the extent that even Rasulullah would at times tell him, okay, talk about this, say this about so and so. And the hadiths are very clear on that. You know, and then the interesting thing is that when you attack these people, they say, oh, see, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he never attacked anybody, which is not true. And they also say, see, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never cursed anyone, which is a very partial statement. And we'll get out to all of this, inshallah, and if I forget aspects, then ask me. The reason that it is so important, you know, for these deviants to put their focus on the women is because the women tend to control the upbringing of the children. This is traditionally how it should be. This is why, you know, we should have good mothers who have knowledge. And again, knowledge is what brings you closer to Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that they can pass that knowledge on to our children. This is why, you know, you get these deviants who will come into an area, and, you know, I know of places in Atlanta, certain people came in, you know, and the first thing they did was open a school for the girls. And of course, initially I'm wondering, why are they opening up a school for the girls and not a school for the boys? Because this is long-term planning. You know, if they can ruin the aqidah of the girls, then they know that they will eventually ruin the aqidah of the household. You know, the belief system of the whole household. Other than, you know, they had other deviant reasons, which came out later on, but this is one of those things. This is why there is such a push for, oh, alima course, do this alima course. You know, become an alima, you know, a scholaress. And I'm not talking, you know, people say, oh, you're talking against, you know, scholars. I'm not. But again, I'm talking against those scholars who propagate this type of knowledge that tries to find fault in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So as I was saying, you know, this whole clip, that person talks about the mercy of Allah and how great the mercy of Allah is, and how we should be asking for the mercy of Allah, but never mentions Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when you see that, when you hear that, you know, okay, there's something wrong here. And it shouldn't be difficult to run away from that. You know, when we look at the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they believed in him before they believed in anything else. It is through him that they believed in Allah. It is through him that they knew how to worship Allah. It is through him that they knew what was right and what was wrong. And people say, oh, the Quran and the Sunnah. Oh, follow the Sunnah. But, you know, you see Hadith and Bukhari, where you have companions who are not just not following the Sunnah, they're not even following the fard, the obligations. And yet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam defends their love for him. People say, oh, you know, if you follow the Sunnah, that means you love him. No. Loving him will make you follow the Sunnah. But the opposite is not true. Otherwise, the hypocrites were the greatest lovers. But they had to show that. Otherwise, people would know they were hypocrites. But hypocrisy is also something you can't hide forever. You know, just like love is something you can't hide. Animosity is also something you can't hide. And so it will come out at some point or another. And you know, the common place that it comes out these days is, oh, you know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, don't praise me too much. Don't praise me in excess. Which is true, but it's not the complete statement. You know, so you start praising Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you start talking about him, praising him. Ah, see, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, don't praise me in excess. the response should be, well, now complete the statement. What did he actually say? He said, do not praise me in excess like the Christians praised Isa alayhi salam. How did the Christians praise Isa alayhi salam? They gave him divinity. They said, oh, he's son of God or he is God. No Muslim does that with Rasulullah. Everyone says Rasulullah. Muhammadur Rasulullah. He is the messenger of Allah. He is not Allah. He is not a part of Allah, but he is the messenger of Allah. And that messengership comes with authority. I mean, simple example. The lowest level of police, a guy who just joined the police force, right? He has authority given to him by the state. He can arrest you. He can tell you don't do this. He can do all of these things. So people think that Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to send his Habib with no authority. And yet the Quran is full of his authority. And what more authority can you have than when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. That whatever he gives you, take it, and whatever he tells you, stay away from it, stay away from it. That is authority. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't limit, well, if he, except for this or that. That's the statement. Whatever. Period. You don't see a single incident where a companion of Rasulullah, when Rasulullah said, do this, that companion said, no, I'm not doing this. The only people you see doing that are the hypocrites. Because they're challenging his authority. But this, again, the reason they need to do this is to get things ready for the coming of Dajjal. When we talk about and look at the perfection of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in every aspect, spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, every aspect of him, we see nothing but perfection. But when we see that perfection, we also know that he is not Allah. But that at the same time tells us if he's not Allah, then there can be nothing else that is Allah except for Allah. When you look at, the idol worshippers, some stone is Allah, or some stone is God. And then some people graduate to where, this man is God, or this animal is God. When Rasulullah cannot be God, then who or what are all these other things? Compared to him, nothing. And so this is why it's so important to take the emphasis away from him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so that when Dajjal comes, then it will be easy for the people to accept him. This is like what we were talking about Friday. Again, there will be many, many Muslims, many, many people who claim to be Muslims who will be his followers. To the extent that people will leave Medina Munawwara to come and follow him. And if you think about that, that should frighten us. Because his fitnah is not just any fitnah. The things will be set up in such a way, and as I mentioned again, before he comes, the malhaba will have already taken place. The Great War, which is coming. Of course, with all the signs, it doesn't seem like it's very far away. That Great War will already have taken place. And so the world will be physically subdued. Most of the world will also be mentally subdued. And he will come, as the one who's going to free everybody. Make everything normal again. Normal, like they talk about, we need to normalize this. It'll make everything normal. And people will jump at the chance. Our Savior is here. That's what they'll think. But again, this is why it's so important. And it's also so important to understand, in Surah Waqi'ah, why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about decency and the decent people, ثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنَ الْآخِرِينَ. That there will be many in the beginning and very few in the end. So that you don't feel uncomfortable being with the minority. People will talk about the hadith where Rasulullah says, be with the jama'ah. Which is true, but what is the jama'ah? And their definition of jama'ah is the group, the bigger group. No. This is why also they don't want us talking about Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Because Imam Hussein alayhi salam shows us that their understanding is totally wrong. Otherwise, he would have joined the bigger group, which was the 22,000 who came against him. And that wasn't just a minutely bigger group. That was a vastly bigger group. 72 compared to 22,000. When you start talking about this, as I said earlier, people say, don't talk against people. Or they'll say that, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he never cursed anyone. He never used profane language. And he also told us not to use this type of language. But he talked against people. This is also why Quraysh would always accuse him, he talks against our gods. He didn't curse their gods. But what did he say? He said, these are not gods. So they said, he's talking against our gods. So he's talking against them. When some people from Najd came to him and asked for teachers to be sent to them, Rasulullah, he sent 70 of Ashab Suf, those that remained on that pulpit outside of his door, waiting for him to come out so that they could learn something from him. He sent 70 of them, educated scholars in the true sense, whose knowledge, was just oozing of the love of Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sent 70 of them. These are beloved people to him. And what did the people of Najd do? They ambushed them and killed them after they had guaranteed to Rasulullah that they would be safe. The incident's known as Bir Mauna. For 40 days, after each salat, Rasulullah sent lanat on them. Allah's curse be upon them, those who perpetrated this act. And this is nothing new for the people of Najd. They've been doing this from the beginning, and they're doing the same thing today. You know, if you look throughout the time of Rasulullah, the people of Najd opposed him in every way that they could, ridiculed him, cursed him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah, he never cursed anyone for his own personal self. You know, like the people of Taif. But when his loved ones were attacked, then that changed the whole situation. So you see a lot of these agents, you know, of various groups that are trying to, ruin people's aqidah. And they will say things, so, and then when you refute them, they say, how can you, and somebody refutes them very aggressively, don't use that kind of language. And they want to hide it behind, see, Rasulullah never attacked anyone. That's what they want to do. They want to hide behind that. But the purpose behind what they're doing is all the same. And this is something we have to understand in order to protect ourselves and to protect our children. And unfortunately we're in a situation where even protecting yourself has become a difficulty. But and when we look, and because these are the same people who attacked Rasulullah, who are now basically running the Muslim world indirectly. And the interesting thing is that these are the same people attacking the Muslims openly, right? And people still think, oh no, they're decent people. Or they'll try to separate their politics from their aqidah, from their belief. And you can't do that because the aqidah is what drives the politics. And this is that, like people say, oh, give the devil his due. Why should I give the devil his due? This is where people don't understand that one action of somebody or one belief can ruin, millions of years of good. The opposite is also true. And this is where Rasulullah, so he talks about that person who has done good all his life. And then in the end he does something, he messes up his aqidah, and he ends up in hell. And then he talks about someone else who's done bad all his life. And then in the end, that one thing through which he attains the mercy of Allah and he enters paradise. So like people will talk about like Yazid and say, well, he had this good characteristic and that good characteristic. Well, none of those characteristics matter anymore. After what he did with Imam Hussein alayhi salam, nothing else matters. Just like with Shaitan. Hundreds of thousands of years of prostrating to Allah. Hundreds of thousands of years of defending Tawheed, the oneness of Allah. Thousands of years of roaming with the angels. And yet, that one. And it's interesting, because in Surah Araf, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this, and he says that, where he says, Illa Iblis, that, all of them prostrated except Iblis. He says, Lam yakum minas sajidin, and he is not of those who prostrate. Even though he is prostrated continuously for thousands of years, and yet he says he's not of those who prostrate, because he refused that one prostration. All of this ties together. Like last 2 weeks we've been talking about the Umrah and how to do the Umrah and the spiritual aspects of the Umrah. But that's part of the point, is none of that matters if the Aqidah is not right. This is why, there is no action that will benefit any non-Muslim on the Day of Judgment or in the hereafter, except for one. There is one action that will even benefit the non-Muslims in the hereafter. And we know this from the hadith in Sahih Bukhari. What is that action? It is to be happy and to spend money at the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the hadith in Bukhari, where, and before I get to the hadith in Bukhari, let's just, because the hadith relates to the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not Hazrat, but to the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Lahab, and Allah's curse is on him. So, Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. So, perish the hands of the father of the flame. Abu Lahab means father of the flame. This was his kunya. And some say this was actually his actual name. Abu Lahab. And perish he. Ma aghna anhu maluhu wa ma kasab. No profit to him from all of his wealth and all his gains. He was a wealthy man. Alright. Sayasla naran dhata lahab. Sayasla naran dhata lahab. Burnt soon will be in a fire of blazing flame. Wamra'atuhu hammalatal hatab. His wife shall carry the crackling wood as fuel. We'll get to that point. Fi jidha hablum min masad. A twisted rope of palm leaf fiber around his neck, around her neck. She'll be carrying this with this twisted rope of fiber burning around her neck. So one is, what triggered the revelation of this? So what triggers the revelation of this is that when Rasulullah ﷺ starts his mission, so you have, in Jabal Nur or Ghari Hira, you have the first revelation that came, Iqra, and we know that. Okay. For 3 years, though, he doesn't preach openly. He's preaching secretly, even though there's word getting out, okay, and people are aware, okay, something's going on. But it's not open preaching, it's still secret preaching. Until the verse in Surah Shu'ara, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, or commands that call your close kith and kin. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he climbs up on Safa. And this was custom of the Arabs. If they had some major announcement of Quraysh, if they had some major announcement to make, they would climb upon Safa, take off their clothes, jump up and down naked, and call everybody and make the announcement. Of course, Rasulullah ﷺ does not do that. He climbs up Safa, he remains calm. He doesn't call everybody. He calls Banu Hashim and Banu Muttalib. So these two cousin clans he calls. These are his close kin. And he invites them. Abu Lahab was in the middle, and Abu Lahab, again, is a blood uncle. So he's in the middle of this business transaction. And when Rasulullah SAW says what he says, Abu Lahab is upset because he left this business transaction that he was going to make a lot of money in. And he says, and he raises his hand and points toward Rasulullah SAW with his hand and says that, you called us here for this? But he doesn't simply say, he says, perish you. You called us here for this. And immediately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals these verses. Perish the hands of Abu Lahab. So we know he's going to be in the fire, and he's going to be in the fire eternally. He's not one of those who's going to be in there and then get out. He died as a disbeliever his whole life, and from this point on, constantly being a thorn in the side of Rasulullah, constantly, going behind him, telling the people don't listen to him, do this, and constant. His wife didn't do anything yet. And yet the verses are also coming for her. So in appearance, she didn't do anything, but what she did do is she defended her husband. So even to defend the one who goes against Rasulullah is the same as going against Rasulullah. So when you have these people that defend those people who wrote things in the guise of being Muslim against Rasulullah saying that, he didn't have knowledge or he didn't have authority, challenging his knowledge and challenging his authority, those who defend them are the same as them. Okay? So we know this. But before this, what had happened? What had happened before this, when Rasulullah was born. So when he was born, Thu'ayba, who was one of the midwives, so she was the slave of Abu Lahab. She was his slave. She was a very expensive slave. So she was there when Rasulullah was born. So Thu'ayba radiallahu anha. And so when he's born, she comes and gives the news of a nephew to Abu Lahab. And Abu Lahab is so pleased with that news that he motions to her with his finger like this, meaning that you are free. I free you for giving me this glad news, good news. That same Abu Lahab, 43 years later, is going to be now motioning that same finger against him. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But when he died, when Abu Lahab dies, his brother Abbas sees him in a dream. And this is what Imam Bukhari mentions in his Sahih. So Abbas sees his brother in a dream, and he asks his brother, how has it gone with you? And he says that very horrible and miserable, and the punishment does not let up, except on Monday. Because Rasulullah was born on Monday. He says, except on Monday when the punishment is eased, and I am allowed to put this finger in my mouth and receive cool drink from it. There is no action, again, that will benefit any person whose aqeedah is not true or correct on the Day of Judgment or in the hereafter, except for this one action of being pleased and spending money on the birth of Rasulullah. So this is also one of those proofs for us celebrating the Mawlid, for being happy at the Mawlid. The Milad, this is, okay? Because we're not celebrating it as the birth of our nephew, we're celebrating it as the birth of Rasulullah. There are those who turn around and say, You know, see, you're just talking about a dream. Those are the same people who say, oh, Bukhari Muslim, Bukhari Muslim, Bukhari Muslim. But then when it comes to something that doesn't fit their agenda, oh, even Bukhari is out. And if it was just a dream, then why did Imam Bukhari include it? If it's just like any other dream. Because he knows it's not just like any other dream. But the other aspect of that also is, you know, it's interesting. If you look at the criteria for accepting hadith and transmitting hadith, one of the criteria for accepting hadith is that whoever you're accepting it from has to be a Muslim. The thing though is when Abbas, radiallahu anhu, when he saw this dream, this was just before he accepted Islam. And yet Imam Bukhari, even though that is one of the criteria that he uses, he overlooks that and still accepts this hadith and places it not just anywhere but in his Sahih. Why? What is the lesson from that? The lesson from that is that if we hear anything, and we'll come to another part of that as well, if you hear anything that goes in favor of Rasulullah, then it doesn't matter who's saying it, you accept it. And if you hear anything that goes against Rasulullah, again, it doesn't matter who's saying it, whether it's Maulvi Saab or Shaykh al-Hadith or Shaykh al-Islam or whoever else, you reject it. And we see this during the time of Rasulullah. We see this, this is, like I said last week, inshallah, next week I'm going to start talking about Abu Bakr on Fridays. We see this as to how Abu Bakr went from being Abu Bakr to Abu Bakr Siddiq. Who came and gave him the news of the Miraj of Rasulullah, of the Asra, of the night journey? Abu Jahl, the worst kafir. Abu Jahl is the one who gave him that news. What was his response? He said, I have no problem believing this, because I see more miraculous things from him every day. And what you're telling me is, guys, I see things greater than this from him every day. Abu Bakr didn't say, I got to do tasdeeq here and figure out, okay, did he really say it or not? And then I'll believe it. No, that's not a big deal. So anything that goes in favor of Rasulullah, we accept it right away. And anything that goes against him, I don't care who's saying it, and I don't care how many times they say it. And what they'll do these days is they'll make that video, and you'll have like 10 different so-called scholars talking, each one saying the same thing, to brainwash you. Oh, that many people are saying it, it must be right. Yeah. So these are things we need to be very, very clear, because again, this is what will lead the people. And I'm not talking about those who are openly non-Muslim, but this is what's going to lead many people who are Muslim, who are claiming to be followers of Rasulullah, into the camp of Dajjal. And these teachers like this, the one that I gave the example of, the clip that was sent, these teachers are the ones who are preparing that groundwork for that to happen. And it's sad, that this has now become the norm. So that when you go someplace, this is what, this is it. You go to the massages these days, and you don't have to go far. You can go, 40, 50 miles up the road here. Go and walk into the masjid, huge name of Allah, no name of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And a masjid is supposed to be a part of Jannah. And there is not a leaf in Jannah, there is nothing in Jannah that does not have the name of Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on it. To the extent that even the Arsh has the name of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on it. And yet, and it's interesting because, I know somebody who went to one of these places, and there's this older guy there who's kind of one of the leaders of that area. And so that person, he asked this leader guy, how come there's no name of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in this place? And his response, which shows you his for lack of any other word, his animosity toward Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his response was, are you here to worship Allah or worship Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? That was his response. And these are the people who are going to be first in line when the dajjal comes. Oh, let me kiss your feet. Which is funny because, if I kiss the feet of my shaykh, shirk. And since I mentioned that, Imam Bukhari, his own statement, he had memorized like 600,000 hadiths. So here, when we talk about the hadith, it may be that the matan or the statement part is the same, but you have different narrators, so that makes it different hadiths. Okay. So he says he memorized. At one time, he said he memorized, and he eventually memorized more. But at one point, he said 600,000 hadiths, of which he said 200,000 of those are sahih. Okay. So according to his criteria, 200,000 of those were authentic. If you look at Sahih Bukhari, it only has 7,000 hadiths or so in it. And actually, if you take out the repetition, it's not even that many. Because there are some places where he's mentioned the same hadiths 2 or 3 different places. Okay. He wrote other books. And one of his other books is Adab al-Mufrad. He's talking about adab, etiquette. It's interesting because there's a whole chapter in that book dealing with the kissing of the feet. And there's a narration in that book where it mentions that Ali, radiallahu, whenever he would ever meet his uncle Abbas, even though the maqam, the status of Ali radiallahu is far above that of Abbas radiallahu, and no one disputes this. Everyone acknowledges that, because Abbas didn't accept Islam until after Badr, the Battle of Badr. Ali has been there from the beginning. And so many other differences. So no one disputes that Ali's status and his virtues are far, far, far greater than that of Abbas. However, whenever he would meet him, because he was older and above him in relation, Ali would always kiss his feet, just out of adab, respect. And so, they keep saying Bukhari, Bukhari, Bukhari. Well, this is also mentioned by Bukhari. Not only this is mentioned, he established a whole chapter just on this topic. We know the hadith where Rasulullah is passing by an area. There's a Baddu or Bedouin going by. Rasulullah he gives him dawah. The Bedouin says, well, what's your proof? This is one of the virtues of Abu Bakr. Rasulullah said, everybody asks for proof except for Abu Bakr. So he says, what's your proof? So Rasulullah commands a tree at a distance to come, and the tree walks to them, and he commands the tree to tell this man who he is, and the tree recites the kalma, and then he tells the tree to go back, and the tree goes back. So the Baddu, of course, seeing this, accepts Islam. Then he said, Ya Rasulullah, give me permission to make sajda to you. Rasulullah says, I will not do that. All right? Not because it's shirk, but he said, I will not do that. All right? He says, then give me permission to kiss your hands and your feet. He says, I will do, you can kiss my hands and my feet. And he allowed him to kiss his hands and his feet. So there's isharatun nas here, there's something that's understood even though it's not mentioned directly. And what is that ishara? That understanding is lowering yourself. It means there are also people who, if you shake, lower yourself to shake someone, say, shirk. Which of course, again, it's not shirk. Because their concept of Allah is very small. This is why everything is shirk to them. This again is also, why they want to emphasize these things is because, again, it will make it so much easier to accept Dajjal when he comes. I mean, because if my concept of Allah or God is very small, then, I won't have a problem accepting this person who's disfigured human, because one of his eyes isn't even right. His right eye is messed up. Short, stocky neck, the way Rasulullah ﷺ describes him. Not a very appealing looking person. Not a handsome man here. And yet people will rush towards him. So this is why it's so, this is why they want to lower the understanding of Allah in front of the people, so that it's not going to be a problem for them to accept him. This is why everything is shirk. But this is again, kind of, when you read the Quran, when you read the Hadith, if those verses aren't leading you towards more love of Allah and His Messenger and the awe, as we mentioned Friday, يُذِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Surah Baqarah, that, and it's the end of verse number 26. So يُذِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَمَا يُذِلُّ بِهِ إِلَّا الْفَاسِقِينَ. And he says, by it, meaning the Quran, he causes many to stray, and many he leads to the right path. But he causes not to stray except those who forsake the path. إِلَّا الْفَاسِقِينَ. Okay? But then he defines who the fasiqeen are. Those who break Allah's covenant. الذين ينقضون عهد الله من بعد ميثاقه ويقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويفسدون في الأرض أولئك هم الخاسرون. Those who break Allah's covenant after it is ratified. What is His covenant? If you look at the Quran, there are 3 covenants that He talks about. One is the general covenant with all of the souls. Alastu bi rabbikum. Where Allah says, am I not your Lord? The response is, Bala, of course. So that covenant already been taken before we were sent to this world. The other covenant is with the prophets, before they were, which is mentioned in Surah Al Imran. وَإِذَا أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ النَّبِيِّينَ. Okay, that and remember when we took the covenant from the prophets, that you will be given the book and the wisdom, and then comes to you this exalted messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Do you follow him? You give him help and follow him. Meaning you need to put your own things aside and you become his follower. And they all agreed. Right? But he also, part of that covenant of obeying Allah is what he mentions in Surah Nisa, Surah number 4, verse number 64. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا يُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. We sent not a messenger, but to be obeyed in accordance to the will of Allah. Meaning that it is the will of Allah that the messenger should be obeyed. And then he says, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ إِذْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُم جَاءُوكَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوا اللَّهَ وَاسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهُمَ الرَّسُولَ لَوَجَدُوا اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. If they had only, when they had been unjust or done dhulm to themselves, come unto thee and ask Allah's forgiveness, and the messenger had asked forgiveness for them, they would have found Allah indeed oft returning, most merciful. So this is also in reality part of that covenant, that when you break the covenant, when you do zulm on yourself, then what do? How do you make tawbah? You go to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is no tawbah without the wasila of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they'll tell you that too. Oh, just ask Allah direct. Just ask Him direct. Then on the day of judgment, when the judgment doesn't begin, then you go and ask Allah direct. Not even the prophets will ask Allah direct. The only one who will ask Him direct is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, yeah, I'm sure I've missed a lot of things. Any questions so far? It's more of a general thing today. And these are not. These are points, or aspect of things to protect us from the fitnah that's going around. The fitnah that's become very prevalent. The fitnah, this is that fitnah where, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam talks about, when he talks about the days that a man will be standing at the door of the masjid, calling the people to the fire. This is that fitnah that we're in now. That fitnah where he said that the masjid will be full and there will be not a single believer. This is the fitnah we're in. Because nothing he said can be wrong. And it's just a matter of opening our eyes. And the sadder aspect of this is that this fitnah is going to continue to get worse. Now you think about this, we have gotten to the point, before social media, before, you had TV even. Stuff would be happening in the world and no one knew about it someplace else. I mean, stuff could be happening next door and you didn't know about it. And now anything happens in any corner of the world and you immediately know about it. To the extent that our brothers and sisters are being massacred. And not just, one place. We're talking multiple places. And if you look at the hands behind it, talk about like Sudan. Sudan, they already broke into two parts. They did that a few years ago. And now the remaining part where you have majority Muslims, they're breaking that apart even further. To the extent that you have like 11.4 million people that are displaced. You have tens of thousands of people that have already been killed. If you look at the forces that are funding this, it's the Gulf states. They're the ones who are propping up, one of the parties that's involved in all of this. And we see this. The interesting thing about this one is that most people aren't even aware of it. So even with all the social media, with all of this, they've been able to successfully hide it in plain sight. However, what's going on in Gaza, they have not been able to hide. Right? Plain sight. How is that happening? I mean, that is a statement to the condition of the Ummah. To the condition, to the weakness and the miserable state of the Ummah. That all of this stuff is happening, and we are helpless to do anything for those who want to do anything. And you have those who think that this is a good thing, literally claim to be Muslims, and this is all, because, those people, they're grave worshippers. That's exactly the statement that came out of various groups. Because they show adab to the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, they're grave worshippers. They themselves worship their king. Whatever the king says, when the king wants to bring back Lat and Uzza and all of these goddesses that the ancient Arabs used to worship, this is our history. Nothing wrong with that. This is history. So again, this is the condition we're in. And then you have, a lot of those who, pay lip service to things, but their aqidah again is messed up. And Allah's help doesn't come when the aqidah is messed up. Yeah, so I don't know. These are topics that we would like not to have to discuss, but at the same time, these are topics that are very important to discuss, because this again is part of trying to protect us from this fitna and from the deception of shaitan. Because this is so this is like I was talking about earlier. When you hear these people, and when they downplay the status of Rasulullah, that's an automatic. Okay, I need to get out of here. That's an automatic right there. Yeah, otherwise, they're going to steal my iman, and I won't even know it. And that's the dangerous part of that. And this is like we were talking about Friday as well. This concept, that person on that clip, it wasn't a video, it was an audio clip, was talking about, we want to ask for Allah's special mercy, because even Fir'aun received Allah's general mercy. Well, everything exists through the mercy of Allah. But then so if she stopped there, it would have been okay. But she didn't stop there. See, because then she talks about, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him so much. And she's talking about all this wealth. So, like the prosperity gospel people, this wealth is all, this is all, God loves me, that's why he's given this to me. Which is not true. If we are growing in our wealth, in our worldly status, and not having any difficulties, then we should be very much afraid. Because again, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us everything here and leaving nothing for the hereafter. And that's the thing though, is any difficulty comes and automatically we start complaining. Why me? Why me? Whereas the attitude of the companions, and you look at even today, there are people today, and you look at them in Philistine, when difficulty comes, they say, Allah, take whatever pleases you. And if you're pleased with us, then we don't care. But if you're not pleased with us, then, and that's the catch. If he is not pleased with us, then we have no place to go. But the pleasure of Allah comes by being connected to the one who is the pleasure of Allah, who is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again. Because these same people will talk about the pleasure of Allah without talking about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you can't, again, if somebody's talking like that, that's not knowledge. So, any questions?
How do you recognize the good from the bad?
So, question is, how do you recognize the good from the bad? The answer actually isn't that complicated. We tend to make things more complicated than they are. The foundation, again, is the love of Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, as I was saying earlier, anything that takes you away from that, this is not good. And anything that brings you closer to that, it's good. But people will just stay these days, and they've done this even in the beginning, they will present what they're giving to you as though it's, see, this is, if you love Rasulullah, you'll practice this, you'll do this and that. Okay. And in the beginning, it may seem very rosy. But if you keep listening to them, then you'll start picking up on things. Where, like when they talk about Rasulullah, they will always be like, give you an example. So, they'll talk about his miracles or his authority, but then they'll always qualify it with, because Allah gave him this power. Okay. Which is true. Because even Shaitan, when he came to deceive Adam and Eve, peace be upon them, Hawa alayhi salam, he stated things that were true. Because if you state things that are openly false, people are going to reject them. So that's why it's important to mix. This is how lies are propagated. You mix it with the truth. So if I make that statement in front of a bunch of non-Muslims, that's fine. But these people make this statement and emphasize this statement in front of Muslims. And the reason that becomes an issue is there isn't any Muslim who doesn't say Muhammadur Rasulullah. Every Muslim understands already that everything is through the power of Allah. All of the authority of Rasulullah is through the power of Allah. When they talk about their own scholars, they'll talk, he's so knowledgeable, he's written 1,000 books, he's done this, he's done that. They never mention, because of Allah. But when it comes to Rasulullah, they keep pounding that because they want to divert you away from being awe-inspired with Rasulullah to, because all you hear after that is simply Allah, 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 Allah. And even Shaitan says Allah, 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 Allah. Doesn't matter how many times you say La ilaha illallah. If you do not accept Muhammad Rasulullah, doesn't do you any good. So when you listen to them, and the other thing is, listen to who the scholars they are quoting. And that's where you have to kind of know what did their scholars say. So, for example, if you look at like the modern day Salafis, they're always quoting Ibn Taymiyyah. Which is funny because they say they're Salafi. Ibn Taymiyyah was 600 years after Rasulullah. Well, if you're Salafi, Salaf means pious predecessors. Well, what about Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmad Hanbal, who were there? Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik are both tabi'i. Those are those who saw the companions. They don't mention them, they keep mentioning Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah, you know, he had 2 fatwas for everything. Because he would give a fatwa that was not accurate, he'd get put in jail, and then to correct that, to get out of jail, he'd give the right fatwa. Except for his last fatwa, where he talks about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sat on the throne. Okay? And that one, when they put him in jail, they didn't let him out. Then the more interesting thing is, when he dies, and Ibn Kathir, who's his student and son-in-law, talks about how they finished 50 Quran for him that night. So these same people tell you Quran Khani is haram, but for their sheikh it was fine. Okay. Ibn Taymiyyah had an issue with lice. And this again, Ibn Kathir mentions this. He couldn't get rid of his lice, so he had a special cap made to try to get rid of lice, and he had a special taweez. He had the taweez. He had an amulet that was supposed to get rid of the lice. The cap sold for, I think, 400 dirham, and the taweez sold for 150 dirham. As tabarruk. So these same people tell you, oh, tabarruk is haram. They also tell you, oh, taweez is shirk. Okay. Well, go tell your scholar that. Then you have those who, you know, they talk about Ashraf Ali Thanwi. Okay, well, Ashraf Ali Thanwi wrote Hifzul Iman, in which he's asked 3 questions, and he answers those 3 questions. And one of those questions is about the knowledge of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the question is, you know, and you can get these books. I mean, they're still in print. And they will defend these books. In fact, one of their modern-day scholars, woman, he gives a whole class on these books. So the question is, did Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, did he have complete knowledge of the ghaib, of the unseen, or was his knowledge of the unseen partial? Okay. Did he have kulli ghaib, ilm al-ghaib, or juzvi? Was it complete or partial? So his answer is that complete knowledge of the unseen is a far-off, distant thing. Even the partial knowledge that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had was just like the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given Amr or Zaid. Like Jim and Joe. Like anybody. And then he goes on and he says, you know, it's like the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to the insane and the crazy and this and that. You know, like he names 4 different things, the insane and the crazy and whatever. And his justification, because everybody knows something that someone else doesn't know. If I tell anybody this, if I tell a common Muslim who doesn't know much this, don't mention who said it, what's his response going to be to that? Right? I mean, it should be, that's a no-brainer. But the problem is, this isn't a thing of the brain, this is a thing of the heart. So now, you know, and then of course, they defend this. One of their other scholars, Ismail Delvi, who they say Ismail Delvi Shaheed, he wrote a book, Sirat-i-Mustaqim. And in that, he writes, you know, that the question that's asked, that he's answering is, that in Salat, can you think of anything other than Allah? So his response to this is that you shouldn't think of anything other than Allah in your Salat. And, you know, you should not think of your Shaykh or Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and it would have been better than to think of your Shaykh or Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in your Salat if you had thought about your crop or some 4-legged animal, because the love of the Shaykh and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, it attaches to your heart. But the love of the crop and the animals and these things is just fleeting. So again, if I make that statement to anybody, to a common Muslim who doesn't know much, without telling them who wrote this, again, what's the response there? And this is why, like one scholar was saying, he said, you know, because people attack us for, oh, see, he's doing that. And he said, look, you know, you're attacking us for what the ignorant people from amongst our group do. Our issues with you isn't what the ignorant people amongst your group does. It's what your scholars do. You know, and of course they keep bringing up, you know, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشْرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ, which was the topic in Friday on September the 27th. I remember that because September 28th we had our Milad program. You know, and if you look at that verse, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشْرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ أَنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. So they translate this as, say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying to Rasulullah, say, or say to them, that I am a human being like you. But I receive revelation that my Lord and your Lord are one. So they say, oh, see, he's bashar just like us, which is not what the verse says. The verse says, mithlukum, mithl, tamthil. To have tamthil, you have to have difference. So, like the example that we gave was, you know, like no one says that cat is like a cat. Because the cat is a cat. No one says, you know, that house is like a house. Now, I might say that house is like a palace, but I'm not going to say that house is like a house. Because again, there has to be a difference. You know, we say, oh, his face is like the moon, which tells me that statement means that the reality of the face is different and the reality of the moon is different. And here, just very quickly, you know, I could give many, many more examples, but you know that should be enough. And here, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, say to them that I am bashar similar to you, that means that the reality of bashar is one thing and the reality of Rasulullah is something different. But he also, now the rest of the verse, which they don't ever mention, أَنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. But I receive revelation that my Lord and your Lord is one. This is what he is the same as us in, is that he is the creation of Allah like we are the creation of Allah, but he is the perfect creation of Allah. We are not the perfect creation of Allah. Our perfection is in our joining to him. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So even that simple verse, they make you think it says something totally different than what it says. And so again, if the knowledge they're giving you is taking away from the maqam of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from his status, from his position, then that tells you that there is an issue here. And again, you don't have to know a lot of stuff for that. Because I know people who don't know a whole lot, but then when they listen to these guys, they automatically, you know, that love becomes their teacher, and it's, something's not right here. You may not know what's not right, but you know, okay, something doesn't fit here. And that should be, you know, when some, like they say here down in the South, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And when someone tells you who they are, believe them. And when these guys, you know, they come up and they tell you, you know, they again, you know, that, see, Rasulullah, he didn't know, you know, what was on the other side of the wall. You know, I believe I know who you are. You just told me who you are. And they'll give so many examples, but the thing is, the examples that they give, you know, are all incomplete. And this is part of why we have these classes and why we've been having these classes. and why we post them online as well, so people that don't come can see. Is it's kind of today, like I said, was very general, but to kind of give more specifics on this. But this is also why that connection with Ahlul Bayt is so important, because you cannot understand the Quran without knowing them. And this isn't me saying this. This is what Rasulullah ﷺ told us. And this is in the books, not in any hadith book. This is like in Sahih Muslim. That the Quran and my household will never be separated. Why is he mentioning them together? He says, I'm leaving two very heavy things behind. And if you adhere to them, you'll never go astray. He says, one is the book of Allah, and the other is Itrati Ahli Bayti, my household. People don't even know who the household is. So if you don't even know who the household is, then how are you going to understand the Quran? Again, like I said, this is why, those videos, I guess, are online now, but, it took, months just to kind of go over, different members of the household and their, how they relate back. But again, it's not complicated. It's not. It really is not. It's a matter of, again, that love. And that love, because the definition of love in Islam, true love is only for Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All other loves fall under that umbrella. And so true love makes you deaf and makes you blind, where you do not see any shortcomings in your beloved, and you're not willing to hear anything against your beloved. So anyone who's talking about Rasulullah Sallallahu and talks about, he'll praise him, and then he says, but he couldn't do this, or this, or this, or there's always that but, then okay, there's something wrong here. But this also gets to why understanding Ahlul Bayt and understanding Ali radhiyallahu is so important. Because Rasulullah Sallallahu said, because so if somebody's kind of downplaying the status of Rasulullah Sallallahu, again, through whether he's attacking his knowledge or his authority or any other aspect, even subtly, then you know that he has an issue with Allah. The issue is with Allah, that why did Allah make him so perfect and not me? Just like Shaitan. Why him and not me? Okay? But if you see anybody having issues with Ali, then you know that he has a true issue with Rasulullah. And this is why Ali is that demarcation between hypocrisy and faith. Because all the hypocrites are going to say, oh, we love Rasulullah. But if you really want to see if they love him, then you look at their attitude towards Ali. Any other questions? Okay. So inshallah we'll end here today. I wasn't sure what to talk about today until this morning. I said, well, I'll just continue what I talked about Friday. And I'm open to suggestions, or certain suggestions. Let me qualify that. As far as like topics and stuff. So, if somebody like last 2 weeks, we talked about the Umrah, because we have people that are going for the Umrah. So they asked, and so I said, well, we'll just do the class on that. But like I said, I am open to suggestions if there is something that you want to cover. And if it's something that I feel I'm comfortable covering, then inshallah we'll do that. And if not, I'll tell you that I'm not comfortable covering that. Or if I feel it's not relevant. And I'll tell you why I think it's not relevant. Which will be, I'm covering it, but not covering it. Okay? So inshallah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and protect us from this fitna today. And protect our children and the whole ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May he give strength and victory to our brothers and sisters in Gaza and Palestine and Sudan and Kashmir and wherever the people are being oppressed, and give them control and power and authority over their oppressors, and give them patience and strength, and may he raise them up and raise us all up. May he give us all the death of a martyr and raise us all up in a condition where he is pleased with us and we are pleased with him. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Oh.